All right, so welcome to our webinar today. So this is going to be the first in what we hope will be an occasional series of webinars about DPLA and what's going on, and what's also kind of, interesting things that are happening around the DPLA network. So we wanted to start by doing one and talking with everyone about DPLA's new website or updated website and new Prosite. And we just wanted to walk you through some of the newer features of the website and introduce you to what's on the Prosite so that you kind of know what to find and know what's where. So we'll talk a little bit about the goals of the redesign. We'll talk about the new portal or website, and then we'll switch over to talking about the Prosite, and then we'll end with some questions and some talk about how to give us feedback and ask questions. So we had wanted to do a redesign of the site for quite a while, and finally last summer we decided to go ahead and go forward with it. We recognize that there are a lot of things that could be improved with the experience of searching DPLA that might involve updates to the API or more significant updates to like the metadata that we aggregate. But we thought that we would take a first step by creating a new kind of look and feel and refreshing it, and also start the process of organizing the material on the site to separate out the hub and other professional-oriented materials from the kind of end-user search materials. So if you remember, the previous DPLA site kind of had all of the information about the organization and the history of the kind of DPLA as a project kind of intermixed with the collection. So we thought a good first start would be to separate out the collection from DPLA, the organization, and through that we'd be able to create a much more robust space for the member network to share information and find information. We also in the process did more than just refresh the look of the overall site, which is the third point, but we also kind of set the stages for creating a more flexible website that can be updated more easily by redoing some of our back-end infrastructure. And we do have some plans for some different features that we can add as we move along. So at this point, I'm actually going to switch over to a live demo of the site. So hopefully it will not, fail. So I'm going to start just by talking about some of the new features of the site. So obviously, there's a reorganization and links to some things like exhibitions and primary source sets that were already available. But one of the two kind of new content areas that we created was the browse by topic. So we started with just 8 topics. These are intended to respond to the request to have a simpler way to sort of get into DPLA content. So each of these contains about 300 items, and they're broken up into 6 to 8 subtopics. So each subtopic contains about 50 to 60 objects. So these were curated by DPLA staff. So, we looked through the collection. We tried to pick materials from a diversity of partners, from a diversity of areas, diversity of types of material, and tried to kind of encapsulate a really broad look at, what are the kind of topics that we know that people are interested in. As opposed to the way the primary source sets and the exhibits work, these actually use live DPLA items. So these are just pulled in from our search index. So if something were to happen to the item, if you removed it from a feed, or if the identifier changed and we no longer had the correct identifier in our list, those items would disappear from this list. So if your items are in here, they might be ones that you might want to monitor if they are disappearing or moving around. So like I said, there's 8 topics to start. We are kind of considering how we might expand this and if we might add other topics over time. I believe that we also, on the main topic page, have links to primary source sets and exhibits that are also on the same topic. So it really kind of brings in materials from across a bunch of different DPLA resources, sort of all in one place. And if you have any feedback on the topics or anything like that, we'd love to hear about that. This was kind of an experiment, and it would be good to know how it's working. Another new feature that we added or expanded for the new site are what we are referring to as user guides or research guides. So I believe we had on the previous site one about family research. We have expanded that to include a couple of different groups. So for educators, which are students and teachers, we have some discussion of primary source sets and other ways you can use search or other resources for using DPLA in education. In family research, excuse me, same thing. Different ways you might use the search and other tools for genealogy research. Lifelong learning is geared towards kind of general users. Scholarly research is more geared towards researchers, particularly probably historians or those who work in the humanities or arts. And developers has information about our API and our bulk download and some of our other features that are actually on the Prosite, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is in addition to our regular search tips, which are also on the new site. And this is just kind of a rundown of how our search works, which may be slightly different than how another library catalog works or Google works or something like that. So information about what Boolean operators we support, wildcards, phrases, and sort of that sort of stuff. One thing that we have, I was going to say that our display of items is pretty much the same as it was previously. We have the same kinds of information. We have the same kinds of facets available. One new thing that we have already been able to add is a citation. So this is a pop-out. This is an automatically generated citation for this object. So this is one of the new features we've been able to add. We're planning to build more new features and aspects into the item results. So we're hoping to, at some point in the future, implement a kind of more like this, suggested other items that match in some way with the item in question. If you paid attention to the announcement of the update to the DPLA map, we're trying to implement a smaller controlled vocabulary of subtypes, which would be more granular than the very simple type metadata, which is just image, moving image, audio, or text, but more controlled than the completely free-form format. So that would be terms like newspaper, photographs, correspondence, maps, things like that, a list of about 30 terms. We also hope to implement possibly IIIF images into the records if our partners have IIIF available, if they're using that at their site. So that'll create a kind of a more seamless experience, and they'll be accessing your IIIF server. So you should be able to continue to see that traffic to your site through your IIIF implementation. And hopefully at some point we will also be able to make live in the metadata collection names. So if your material from your institution, your hubs, have information about a collection that a material belongs to, like perhaps this is from a collection of photographs by Edward Wallowich, or a collection on a particular thematic topic or something like that. If that information is in the metadata, we hopefully will be able to expose that in the future and provide it as kind of one of these clickable links so that you could find other items in that collection. We're still working a bit on that. We need to work a bit with the partners on their metadata to make that happen. So I am going to take a little break, and I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey, who's going to give you more insight into the new Prosite.
Before I jump into the Prosite, it might be a good time to just stop and see if folks have any questions about the redesign on the user side of things. There'll be time for questions at the end as well, but since we are transitioning, I thought it'd be good to just sort of check in. All right, so unfortunately, let me exit my screen. I'm going to share my screen now. Thanks, Bianca. So the citation feature is nice, I'm seeing, which is good. I agree. I remember how long it used to take to try to put together citations for something. All right. So can you now see my screen? Excellent. Thanks, Gretchen. So just to give you a quick sort of how you can find, I actually have the Prosite up here, but I'm realizing that if you were on the DPLA main site, in order to get to what we're calling the Prosite, you'd just click on DPLA Pro here over along the right side of the header, which will take you to the Prosite. And as Gretchen talked about when she was talking about the goals, part of it, the idea was to develop this sort of separate place for the different communities that we partner with. And a big part of our partner group is the Hubs community. So I'm going to start with this page, just kind of go through this page a little bit. So we've got a section here for each of the communities, which I'll come back to. There's DPLA news, and this actually gets everything from the DPLA blog. There are certain sort of more technical, cultural heritage oriented posts that wouldn't show up on the news for the DPLA main site, but we felt that our partner communities really wanted to hear about all different aspects of DPLA. So all of that shows up there. I'll start quickly with the prospective hubs. So you guys are all existing hubs, but I'm sure that you remember back through the process of thinking about joining DPLA, for newer hubs going through the application process. So that's really what this section is for, basically just information for those who are interested in becoming a hub, which includes information about the difference between a service and a content hub, et cetera. And I won't go through a ton of details, but I will say that it also links to a list of all of our hubs. So if folks are looking for the most recent DPLA hub map, this is one place that you can find it. And then again, the list to all of our hubs. Actually, sorry, let me go back to the Hub main page. So a big part of the content on this Prosite does live here under Hub Network. And we've developed a homepage for the Hub Network that is somewhat similar in style to that Prosite main page. So we have a news feature here at the top that we can change out regularly. Right now we're highlighting the fact that District Digital is now discoverable in DPLA. We would love input on, would you like to have hubs be able to share news through the Prosite? It doesn't necessarily all have to be coming directly from DPLA. I'm going to come back to the center section because this is really where a lot of the meat is. We've got a feature here which is similar to the pages that I was just showing for prospective hubs, and then again the news. But like I said, a lot of the meat here is the 3 sections in the middle. So each has a brief description and a few of the links that we think folks will be most interested in or need to reference most quickly. But there is a lot of additional information under this. So for example, if I click on member governance, we've got kind of an overview of our network council and our member council, our network council and our advisory council, as well as a list of member hubs. We've got, the list of all of our network council members. So if your hub is a member and you're not sure your network council, not sure who your network council rep is, for those of you at bigger hubs, this is one place that you can look. The middle section also talks a bit about the member program, the member benefits, and again, that list of member hubs. One of the things that I will say is that particularly this member governance section is a place where we really see there will be a lot of growth coming up. We're about ready to announce all of our working groups that will be working through the membership collaboratively on topics like assessment and the right statements and those sorts of things. So all of that is going to help kind of fill out this member governance section. And I think that's it for those two big pieces of things. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Gretchen for documentation and tools. You're muted. Am I the only one who can't hear Gretchen?
Oh, I was muted. Sorry, everybody. We did not practice this, and I'm realizing we should have. This is a lot harder when you're trying to hand off the screen between people virtually. So you can see my screen?
Yes.
Kelsey? Okay, great. So I'm gonna pick up where Kelsey left off, and I'm gonna talk about some other parts of the Prosite. So this section, documentation and tools, is currently kind of a recreation of the page that we have had on our wiki for a while. That just has an aggregation of a lot of useful documents and different, kind of tools and things to help out for hubs and the kinds of work that they do. So under documentation, we have a couple of different pieces of information and policies. This collection development guidelines is a brand new one. We just put it up, I think, last week. And so this answers a need that we've gotten a lot as we've worked with hubs over the years, particularly newer hubs, but as you add material to your hubs, a lot of questions of, is this type of material appropriate for DPLA? And so we wrote something up to give some kind of general rules about different categories of materials: serials, scholarly materials, born digital, archival content, AV, and scientific or other specialized content. With all of these things, it's really like a case-by-case decision, and that's kind of partially why we waited so long to put something like this together. But now, after having worked with the content for like 4 years now, we have a pretty good sense of what works well in the current DPLA context, meaning with our current method of searching metadata only and not full text, with our current kind of level of description of other objects in the collection. If you're familiar with like archival style description that tends to describe things at an aggregate rather than an item level, we don't have collection records, that sort of thing. So it's worth a peruse through this if you have one of those questions about some new material, just to kind of get a sense of where we stand. But you're of course still welcome and maybe even encouraged to go ahead and ask, do you think that this is appropriate for adding into DPLA? But we wanted to put this up here to kind of give you a sense of where our kind of thinking is on that. So you'll notice that we didn't name it policy. It's not like a sort of hard and fast rule. It's more of some guidelines of how we make those decisions. The metadata application profile is kind of its own level thing. It still has its own page here with the current version. the introduction to the DPLA metadata model, which I would suggest to anyone who's new to DPLA, new to our metadata practices. If you have a new hub coming on, it's a kind of a very readable introduction to the documentation of MAP. We also have the previous versions of the map here if you're interested in seeing those and how they changed over time. Then we have a statement on metadata here that just kind of talks about our policy, our thinking of what metadata within DPLA is and what it means to share metadata. So this previously was on the public site under an about section with different policies, but we felt it made a lot more sense to put it here with the metadata application profile. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, that is where that lives now. Other documentation we have here, a server change policy. This is something that has been in place for a while, but was maybe not very public. This has to do with if you're moving your content around to a new server, it has to do kind of with the stability of identifiers. We have a list and description of different metadata enrichments, and we have some DPLA graphics available for you to use, like the map and the logo and things like that. Then we have a section that is related to different tools for mapping and doing ingest of data. You can access our repositories of code on GitHub. The re-ingest dashboard that you may be familiar with if you work with me on ingest gives you a sense of your schedule for when your content is going to be ingested, and then some more specific information about your hub and links to our Jira ticketing system so you can see like when we've actually done work to ingest your data or update your data mapping. This still exists out on our wiki because that's an easy way to integrate with our Jira ticketing system. There is a link here to some information about your analytics and how to get access to your analytics dashboard. It's not a direct link to your dashboard because that's through Google. We have our spreadsheet of partner crosswalks that's been available, still available. This is a good place to go if you're thinking of changing up some metadata, want to see what some others are doing. We just added some sample templates if you use OpenRefine for taking your Tabula data and outputting it as Dublin Core or mods. These are courtesy of the District Digital Hub, and I think they're really great examples of some interesting tools that you might use if you want to do some data remediation. We also have samples of XSLT from several hubs who shared them with us in the past. I would love to add more. If you have an XSLT that you would want to share with the community, if you want to see some other people's XSL, then please let me know. I'd love to add more to that list. Finally, we have a number of guidelines and tutorials. So partnering with DPLA, initial metadata requirements is another somewhat older document, but it's really for that pre-first ingest and goes over the basics. Our data quality guidelines go step by step through each property in DPLA and give you a sense of what would a good value look like in that property. There's some introduction. What would an improved, what would a better quality, and what would a best quality look like for each property? So it gives you a sense of kind of how it's used, whether or not it's displayed in the DPLA portal, whether or not it's optional or recommended. So another good document for like a new partner who's maybe just familiarizing themselves with DPLA map. We also have guidelines for our geographic and temporal enrichments and our right statement guidelines for integrating standardized right statements. And then kind of in the middle, which I realize maybe I should have put it at the bottom, is a link out to materials in our GitHub from 2 different metadata analysis workshops that we did. So there's some really great content here that you can walk yourself through. It's all written out, what was presented in the workshop. So this is something that you can do yourself on your own kind of schedule. All the data that you would need is in this repository. All of the requirements for what you'd need to have installed are listed here. So, you know, if you're interested in learning some tools like OpenRefine, or learning to use some Python tools for analyzing data, or just harvesting data, this is a good resource for that. Let me find out where I am in my notes. So I just want to also just quickly walk you through the other parts of the DPLA Pro site for the other communities. We have a developers section, which repeats some of the stuff that's in the main site guide, but we have information about our API codecs, and this is another thing that's kind of a work tutorial that you can kind of work through. And if you're if you work with metadata in DPLA, I'd strongly suggest going through and doing this. It can be very useful to look at records directly through the API view, because you can see kind of our DPLA record, and you can see all of it. You can see even fields that maybe have been suppressed from the portal view. And in addition to that, you can see your original record. So you can kind of see how your original data mapped to the DPLA data, and that can really help with troubleshooting if you want to kind of figure out why you're seeing something you're seeing. So you can request an API key, and you can go through this API codex and learn how to do it. We also have information about our bulk download of data. We have data going back for I believe a couple of years so you can see past snapshots of DPLA data. We do that on a monthly basis. Our tech team has a wiki with lots of documentation of our technology that goes along with the GitHub code that I shared earlier. And then we have some sample code and libraries of other developers who've created code or libraries for particular languages to work with the DPLA API. So these are really good resources if somebody is interested in creating some new application using DPLA data. Another community is our educators. So we work with a lot of K-12 and higher education educators, teachers, and so we've done a number of projects over the year. We have some information here about some of our previous research projects. We have information about our primary source sets, which of course came out of some of our grants and research projects. We have some materials for professional development of teachers, and we have some materials available here online about that. We have some space here for our Education Advisory Committee. So the EAC help us to develop primary source sets, and we have a lot of materials for those members here. We have some research guides actually for students who are working on National History Day projects. So here's our page for 2018. The theme is conflict and compromise, and there are sample topics that are part of the guidelines, and we have examples of primary source sets and exhibitions that might help those students with doing research on any of these topics. So really great materials there. And finally, we have some outreach materials. So these are things like graphics, slide decks, promotional materials that you can request, but other kinds of guides and fact sheets that you can download, some articles about DPLA. So if you're looking for resources, if you're talking with any of your partners about DPLA, this educator section, it's also linked under the community reps section, as you can see. That's a great place to find some resources about DPLA. Switching over to the community reps program is for members of our allied community who teach about and advocate for DPLA throughout the country. So typical things our community reps have done include speaking about DPLA at libraries and other conferences, doing workshops using DPLA. We have bios of all of our reps. Yeah, there we go. And we also have, again, the outreach materials linked here because our reps use a lot of those. The last but not least is our ebook community and our ebook projects. So we have a number of ebook projects that are in the works. We recently launched our DPLA exchange, which is kind of a marketplace for library acquisitions of ebooks from several different vendors. We have our open bookshelf project, which is creating a feed of really good, substantial free ebooks that are available through the DPLA exchange. The Open eBooks project is when we partnered with NYPL and some other partners to create a free ebook reading app and collection for low-income children. Our Curation Core is a group of librarians and other professionals who do collection development for our ebook projects. And we also have just some general resources for the ebook community, just a list of some places to go if you want to get more involved in the library's work on ebooks. And finally, just some information about some of our hubs that have a lot of ebooks. So I'm going to hand things back to Kelsey now for our kind of last wrap up.
Yeah, I was actually going to say it might have been easier to have you just pull up the thing, but I will take care of this here, of course. Oh, good. All right. So before we sort of move to questions, all right, can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right, thanks. So before we move to questions, just a few notes about where we are going with this. So there are, as we continue to build collaboration across the network through the working groups and other things that are happening with the member network, more information about that will continue to be added. The Network Council is also, many of you know, about ready to kick off what we've been calling a Hubs Profile project, which will let hubs provide a place for hubs to share sort of some basic information about governance and funding and structure and technology and metadata standards, so that other hubs can learn and benefit. Often we hear both from prospective hubs and new hubs, and existing hubs, that they'd like to be able to easily figure out which hubs are using REPOCs, so I could reach out to them, or what kinds of committee structures do other hubs have, as we're thinking about maybe streamlining our organization or getting more people involved in our organization. So that project is being driven by the Network Council, but it won't be a members-only project. We'd open it up to any hub who wanted to share that kind of information, and it will start in Google Drive just so we can kind of get things off the ground quickly. But the idea is that it would eventually be available through maybe a wiki that is connected to the Prosite. And I saw a question on the chat about password protected content. So at this point, we don't have password protected content, but we recognize that hubs may want to share information with each other and work together in ways that wouldn't make sense to kind of open to the public, or there might be information that you would want to share with other hubs and not necessarily the public. So that is definitely something that we've been discussing as well. And so along those lines, one way we've talked about making that possible is trying to identify some good user-friendly third-party tools that would allow for collaboration and information sharing, so that folks could edit their own hub profile page or other kinds of pages that we might be making available. And I guess with that, I would say, and then what else in terms of future plans, I think depends in part on what we hear from you all. Is there information that would be useful to you in your work that we're not sharing yet, that you didn't see or haven't seen as you've looked at the Prosite? Is there other kinds of news or information that you'd like to share across your hubs? And are there, communication and collaboration tools that you think would help the hub network work more effectively and that we should be looking into? So with that, I will open it up to questions, feedback, any input on any of those questions about how we could build the Prosite out to better serve your needs, and, any questions about, the DP.LA end user site as well. And I'm going to stop screen sharing here so that we can see each other as we talk. All right. So opening it up to questions then.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Sorry, I was muted that time. We're having mute
great.
issues.
Hi, my name is Bianca Crowley, and I'm with the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And I really appreciated the sort of overview of the different documentation that you have available. I think it's laid out really well. And I was just curious how you guys, because forgive me, I'm not familiar with the previous site, how many people, or sort of the work process for getting to the presentation of your documentation right now, because I think that's a struggle that we have, is how best to present our documentation. And so I'm just curious about that process.
Well, I think the process was that I called Kelsey one day and said, hey, we should put all this stuff on one page. Unfortunately, we previously had in our wiki, we actually previously had a pretty robust wiki that was set up by Emily Gore and Amy Rudersdorf, actually. And it had a lot of materials for prospective hubs, a lot of walking them through the steps of becoming a hub. When Kelsey started, Kelsey and I kind of talked about what we wanted to do with that, because we knew we were going to develop this Prosite. And at that point, we ended up having a lot of outdated information on that wiki. So we started by kind of trying to reorganize what we had on the wiki, and kind of brainstorming about what made sense to sort of group together. In the 4 years I've been here, have kind of focused on trying to document as much as I can about our data quality expectations. So I started to accumulate a number of documents that, I could kind of put in one place. And I recently, within the documentation itself, when we redid the map earlier this year, the group that worked with me on that, we decided to copy a really nice thing that Europeana does, which is that at the beginning, on the first page of all of their documentation, is a list of kind of all of their documentation resources, and it says, you're looking at this one. Here are other pieces of documentation that are available. Maybe you instead want to look at one of these other pieces. So we incorporated that into the different documents that we have. But I would say so far it hasn't been an extremely thoughtful process. I do hope that we're going to be putting together a metadata working group. And one of the things I do hope that group can work on, or I will maybe try and suggest for the group, although I'll let the group kind of decide what it wants its priorities to be. But one thing that I would like to work on is to perhaps increase the sharing of tools and XSL style sheets and documentation at hubs about how they do their metadata and other kinds of work. And so we may grow that section, and we may grow it collaboratively with that group. Does that answer your question, or were you looking for?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I just, I really liked what I saw, and I may want to borrow that model
Please
here
do.
and there, because we are actually making a transition to, I noticed that you were using Confluence, and I like how that was presented. So anyway, thank you for the live example.
Kelsey, do you see the question?
Yeah, hub member outreach as part of the Prosite design. Yeah, so we did in a couple, trying to think about like, so we sought early feedback on the Prosite at the member meeting that we had in Atlanta. We thought we were under, this is gonna sound like I'm making excuses, but we really, in going live with this, we had thought we were under a really accelerated timeline. We started the process at the beginning of, I think like June of last summer, and we thought we were going to go live in September. We didn't end up going live until March, but as a result, we, I think, followed processes that we might not normally have, or that I think we would have built in more iterative process. You know, I think Gretchen and I both, in terms of the hub section, really drew on the conversations that we have regularly with the hubs, and, you know, what we've heard about, or, you know, when people contact us and they're like, oh, I need this information, you know, we file it away that, you know, maybe we should add that to the website or the wiki. And so I would say it was more organic than kind of, you know, sort of formalized hub member feedback on the Prosite.
But I think we are really interested now in hearing about what would be useful for you
Yes.
to have on this Prosite, particularly in the member and the member governance section.
Yeah.
As Kelsey mentioned, we are looking into maybe some third-party tools to handle more communication aspects, but having your input on that will even help us to kind of decide what we need and what would be useful. And so, you know, we put this together, as Kelsey said. The timeline ended up being a lot longer than what we thought we would have, so we were kind of cramming to kind of get something up, get some kind of structure up, with the understanding that hopefully it can be a strong enough sort of infrastructure and scaffolding that it can kind of grow over time.
And it's built that way, so we can actually, there are different ways that it can be, we can add more squares in the, you know, sort of in the, on the hub main page section, if there are more things that you'd like to see, and as that grows. So yeah, if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear them now. You could also email us after the fact. Or if folks have other questions, we can continue to take questions, and you can type them in the chat as well.
And yeah, if we don't have any questions, that is certainly fine. You can feel free to continue to send the both of us email. We fully accept that a clogged inbox is part of our job description, so please always feel free, don't hesitate.
Yeah, I always like to wait a little bit longer in case somebody is fumbling with their mute button, the way I always do.
We have that question.
What other informal communities do we have to connect? Do you mean within the hub network, or some of the other communities that were represented on the Prosite?
Or within the professional content.
Yeah, or within the professional. I could start to outside the Prosite. So like, what other avenues do we use to connect among the network, is how I think that I should interpret that. Excellent, thanks. So we have a few Google groups. So we have the All Hubs list. We have a list for the Network Council, which every one of the member hubs has a representative and an alternate to the Network Council. So we have a Google group for that as well. We do regularly send messages out to those groups. The All Hubs group in particular can also be used for communication among hubs. It has kind of flurries of activity that ebb and wane. You know, often somebody will come on and say, oh, we're looking for policies about, you know, we need to put together an MOU. Does anybody have examples? And then there'll be kind of a flurry of activity. So if you are not on the All Hubs list, please let me know, and I would be happy to add you to the All Hubs list. Gretchen, are there other communication and community or community avenues. I mean, we use Google Drive for some of the network activities as well. So we have a rights information group that has open calls that folks share information about implementing rights statements. As we said, we're going to have new working groups that will also start new avenues of communication. So,
and sorry, and Kelsey and I have also talked about wanting to. This is the first and what we hope will be a series of webinars, maybe every other month or so. We have some ideas of some future topics. We're going to do some where we have members of the network share about work they've done. We're going to have some where we talk about work DPLA has done. We also have talked about the idea of reinstituting kind of all hub calls for more like sort of working meeting, or potentially reviving a newsletter to be more of a kind of routine communication. Kind of my philosophy is if you get kind of routine communication from us, then maybe you kind of remember that we're there and don't hesitate to ask us questions when you have them. But we can also maybe fill in some questions that you may not have realized that you had. So our hope is that kind of moving forward through the rest of the calendar year, you might start getting some more of those kind of routine communications from DPLA. Those are obviously not kind of reciprocal communication outlets, but ways that you can kind of know what's going on and then know to come to the Prosite or come to the All Hubs list to ask a question or find out more.
I had somebody ask if we had a Slack channel, and I haven't had a sense, it has been sort of an isolated question. I haven't had a sense on if there would be a groundswell of desire for a DPLA Hubs Slack instance. But if you, a +1 for a Slack channel. So we got at least a +1. If feel free, if that's something that you think you'd be active on, put it in the chat, send me or Gretchen a note that you agree that that would be a good idea. If there's a groundswell around that, we could probably get that going too. Ooh, Mattermost, I haven't heard of that one. So that's a good new one for me to look up. So definitely looks like there's some support for Slack or a Slack-like tool. And I definitely will have to look into Mattermost, which I haven't heard of yet. So that's good to know.
There was a question about the working groups, and so we do have working groups that are specifically within the member network, so those are representatives of our member hubs. There is always the chance that we might convene an ad hoc group to work on a specific issue. We've done that in the past. We had a working group looking at archival description. We had groups looking at newspaper digitization and metadata quality guidelines. So there may be a kind of ad hoc opportunities in the future. I don't want to close the door on that, but the kind of standing working groups are a member network feature.
And I will also say that, I mean, we're new. We're coming close to the close of our first year as having introduced the membership model, and so that could continue to evolve as well. But yeah, for now, as Gretchen said, we may call ad hoc groups on an as-needed basis. But for now, the sort of formal slate of working groups that we're going to be introduced are part of the member network.
We're going to get members-only jackets. I'm just kidding.
only those of us who are Gen Xers even recognize that reference. We'll send you all a picture of a members-only jacket.
It'll be in the notes.
It'll be in the notes. Any other questions or suggestions? Great. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, everybody. As Gretchen said, we do hope that this will be the first in a series, so keep an eye out for more opportunities. Gretchen has some, I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, I hope, but Gretchen has some ideas on a metadata webinar we could do about some exciting metadata projects that we think you guys would be interested in. There's some potential technology opportunities that we think you guys would be interested in, related to ingest tools and that sort of thing.
And you can suggest topics to us as well. Like, we would love to hear if there's something that you think that would benefit from a community discussion. These won't necessarily, these will be open primarily, so it could even be something that's just a more general topic that you think that the DPLA would be a good avenue for a discussion about. So I think that's it. I will say thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm recording. Bye.
Bye.